Good morning. So yes, we are the Houston Advanced Research Center, HARP. We're located just north of here in the Woodlands. We've been here for about 40 years. We are a pretty well kept secret, unfortunately. Oh, excuse me. I am muted. There we go. Okay.
Hopefully that's better. Thank you.
We are
getting feedback. Research Center, or HARP. We're located in the Woodlands, just north of Houston, and we are an independent research organization. We are a nonprofit, not advocacy organization. So what we do is resilience and sustainability research, especially around water, air, and clean energy. And as I mentioned, we have been doing this work for about 40 years, and we have about 30 folks on staff who are really seeking resilient and sustainable solutions to support communities towards a more equitable future. And a lot of that work is based on we as scientists knowing where the information is, knowing where the data are, and connecting with folks who are looking for answers in their own communities and are looking for solutions and trying to make those more accessible. So we're committed to working with under-resourced communities and to really co-develop and implement climate equity and resilience initiatives. We're looking for collaborative opportunities. And so we're so grateful that everyone is here and ready to work together towards what the group feels are their common goals. This is Rachel. And this is Rachel.
Okay, yeah, I'm not going to make Erin give the slides about ASAP. I will do that, no problem. Okay, so ASAP, American Society of Adaptation Professionals. We are a professional association and a social impact network for climate change adaptation practitioners, students, applied researchers. We have about 1,000 individuals and 45 organizations in our network. And we have folks from across all sectors, public sector, for-profit companies, nonprofit organizations, and academia in all regions across the US and Canada, as well as the Caribbean and some other countries scattered throughout the globe as well. And together with our members and partners, we are advancing the field of climate change adaptation. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, we're going to cover that today by learning from Western science, indigenous knowledges, and the lived experience of people addressing climate impacts in their communities. And we define an adaptation professional as anyone who's using climate information in their day-to-day work. And that day-to-day work could be work you're paid for, it could be work you're doing as a volunteer, it could be care work. And so that is what makes our network so diverse across sectors and scales. And it's really that diversity that brings it its strength. And we're also really privileged to have 45 organizational members. It's an incredible group that includes federal agencies, cities, engineering and planning firms, community organizations who provide invaluable support to our network, are working with us to advance the field and receive support from the network to advance their own adaptation and resilience goals as well. So I want to give a shout out to them. ASAP programs are designed to build the capacity of our members to do effective climate adaptation work and work together to strengthen the adaptation field. And they're divided into the 3 areas that you can see here on the screen. So we've got network support and peer learning. We have over a dozen peer learning groups monthly. We have member leadership development opportunities. We have a mentorship program. And then we have our technical assistance and capacity building work, where we're working together with frontline communities and a variety of different organizations to take adaptation action in the realms of community development, nature-based solutions, climate resilient water infrastructure, accessing federal funding, and building resilience hubs and more. So a lot of the topics that we're going to be talking about today for your community projects. And then education and workforce development, including providing guidance for practitioners and researchers, offering trainings, and conducting workforce development research. So our LEAD program encompasses both peer learning, as well as technical assistance and capacity building. And we're so excited for LEAP to be creating pathways for people working on community resilience and environmental justice to find and connect with ASAP and our members, for LEAP to create opportunities for ASAP members to work with and learn from community leaders, and contribute to community-led adaptation projects, and ultimately to create a stronger and more diverse network of people preparing for the impacts of climate change. And before we move on, I just want to give a thank you to our funder, the National Academies of Sciences Gulf Research Program. So thank you so much to the National Academies.
Thank you, Rachel. Oh, can everybody hear me? Yes. Everybody on Zoom, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to do a LEAP overview right now. So what is the LEAP program? I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with the acronym, but just to reiterate, it's Leading with Equity and Adaptation Practice. The purpose is to meet and build relationships with fellow participants and project staff. And so overall, there are going to be two groups. As you already know, there's leaders, community leaders, and the climate adaptation practitioners. And the leaders from communities will be addressing the climate issues that are impacting their communities with ASAP practitioners who will be helping them with their community-based projects. So, but overall, the LEAP program is to help everybody in this program to build space where both teams learn from each other and deepen relationships and grow in several areas. So the program goals, there's several goals. Again, just some I will be reiterating here from the previous slide, but again, it's building relationships between the community leaders and adaptation practitioners, fostering local knowledge base and access to climate adaptation resources, and enhancing diversity and enabling equity in adaptation work. So this really is a new program to support climate change projects in the upper Texas Gulf Coast region. And once again, you know, the focus is centering around community perspectives on the impacts of extreme weather and climate change, supporting the community leaders' efforts to make their community safer and healthier. And again, participants can expect, you know, growth in their skills and networks as, you know, you expand your knowledge, and overall it's community collaboration and leadership. So the timeline, just going to go over that real quickly. Program kickoff event, we are here. Next, after this kickoff, post kickoff, from July to September 2023, it's going to be team building and team dialogue. So ASAP practitioners, you guys will be matched with your community teams, the community members who are here and also on Zoom. So what does that mean? So team building and team dialogue basically means you're going to define your, you're going to define a set of questions to drive climate resilience planning and action in the community. You're going to identify and characterize climate risk in the context of local trends, frame localized climate change resilience and adaptation strategies, and identify and scope a project to address climate risk and community priorities. After September 2023, we go into the action phase, which is fall 2023 to summer 2024, which means that there's going to be regular check-ins with other teams and program staff. There's also going to be support identifying strategies for climate resilience planning and action, and then support for exploring available resources and potential funding and finance opportunities to expand project impacts. And then lastly, after all the hard work that you guys have put in all of next year, at the very end of fall of 2024, celebratory event, meaning you're going to share your results, not just amongst your cohorts. You are also invited to bring other community members within their communities to come to the celebratory event to showcase what you guys have done. All right, Karen.
You can sit in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Zoom logistics. Obviously, we're still figuring some of that out. And the plan is, the reason that we have these tables kind of set far apart from each other in the room is so that every team can gather around a table or two and connect with their online team members as well when we have our small group breakout sessions. And so what we're going to ask you to do is the team lead will facilitate the discussion, and then another person will be responsible for monitoring the Zoom chat and making sure that the folks who are online are still being heard and can communicate. We're also going to be, then there's going to be another person responsible for taking online notes. We've created several Google documents so that everyone can contribute to those in real time if they wish. But it's always nice to have someone at the table who's kind of responsible for jotting all that stuff down. So it's no longer me, it's actually going to be Megan online, separating folks into their teams into the Zoom breakout rooms for the working sessions. The teams will collaborate and discuss with their virtual members and their in-person members. And then we'll give you a 3-minute warning before the sessions conclude, and everyone will come back into the main room or turn their attention to the big screen. And so you'll automatically be brought, if you're online, from your breakout rooms back into the main group. And I have included my cell phone number. You can, of course, use the chat, but if you put something in chat in your breakout room, it will not carry over to the chat in the main room, which is frustrating, hence the cell phone number. And so we want to make sure that we're responding to any technical issues that might come up, and we appreciate your patience, but we're really hoping that we can get this going to really have a really good conversation here today. And then some of you, this is especially for the folks online, we've created a second Zoom invite for the afternoon session to try and make the recording a little bit more manageable, so it's not 6 hours of our discussions that we have to edit down. And so if you log into that one around lunchtime, it should log you out of the morning session and you should end up right there. But again, please take a photo of my cell phone number or write it down so that you can reach me in case you have any technical issues. Good morning, progress.
Okay, so before we really get into the fun of it, just going to go over some key concepts and definitions that you guys will be hearing throughout almost all of the presentations that we have here. So as you see in the slide, we have several that are all climate change related. So we have climate change, basically the definition of that is changes in average weather conditions that persist over multiple decades or longer. Then we have climate impact, effects on natural and human systems that result from hazards. And then climate change adaptation, which means in human and natural systems, the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects. And then disaster preparedness, a set of measures undertaken in advance by governments, organizations, communities, so several entities, including individuals, to better respond and cope with the immediate aftermath of a disaster, whether it be human-induced or caused by natural hazards. And then lastly, community engagement and collaboration, meaning it's a two-way process by which, one, the aspirations, concerns, needs, and values of citizens and communities are incorporated at all levels and in all sectors in policy development, planning, decision-making, service delivery, and assessment. And second, governments and other businesses and civil society organizations involve citizens, clients, communities, and other stakeholders in these processes. Next is resilience. So the capacity of an individual, group, or system to prevent, withstand, respond to, and recover from a climate-related disruption. Exposure, the presence of people, assets, or ecosystems in places where they could be adversely affected by hazards. Sensitivity, the degree to which a system, population, or resource is or might be affected by hazards. And then adaptive capacity, which is the ability of an individual, asset, or system to adjust to a hazard, take advantage of new opportunities, or cope with change.
And so, do you want to tell them where the glossary is located in their handbook in case they want to refer back?
I believe it should be at the very end of your handbook.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. So why is community-led adaptation work important? A lot of you have explained what you want to give and what you want to receive throughout this program. And I feel that everybody has an idea as to why this is important, but just to kind of go a little bit more into detail of what it really means and why it's important. So basically the definition is the ability of a local community, you guys, to prepare for, withstand, and bounce back from shocks and stressors that are anticipated to result from a changing climate. So overall, this is a holistic approach where what's being involved is traditional knowledge with innovative actions. You're addressing the current vulnerabilities that are taking place in your communities. And the goal is to help build not just yours, but your community members' capacity, knowledge capacity to cope with the uncertainties and challenges that are taking place now and in the future. Yeah.
Okey-dokey.
All right, thank you, Sequoia, for explaining all of that. The next thing that we're going to do is our first activity of the day. Yay, I'm gonna sit so Zoom folks can see me well as well. Who here is familiar with Mentimeter? Is anyone not familiar with this tool? Not familiar with it? Okay, so Mentimeter is a way that we're going to collect all of your information about our next activity, which is going to be around what we call community agreements. Community agreements is something that we're going to build together, and they're basically a set of, you can think of them as ground rules that we're going to take through with us throughout the day, so that we're making sure that we're dialoguing and interacting with each other in a way that's intentional and respectful. So we're going to build these together after I go through the ones on these slides. And how you're going to do that is go to menti.com. You can see it on the slide. It's menti.com. And you're going to use the code up there, 8550-4204. Okay? Perfect. And you can do that from your phone or your laptop, either one. But before we do that, I want to go through the community agreements that we already have on the slide. So the first one that I want to name is honoring intent versus impact. And this is all about communication and the way that we dialogue with each other. Throughout the day, we're going to be talking about concepts that some folks might view as controversial. And so when we're talking to each other, there might be instances where we could accidentally offend each other, or dialogue in a way where someone's words might be taken in a way that's not what they intended. The purpose of this community agreement is to honor the intent of what someone was trying to say, and making sure that you see the good intention maybe in what they were trying to say, but also that person who might have offended somebody else, honoring the impact of what they say as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we're going to do together when we're dialoguing is using I statements and speaking from your own experience. And in that, embedded with that is also making sure we're not invalidating other people's personal experiences. Virtually, a community agreement that we're going to try to use is to use the raise hand function if you want to speak when you're meeting with your teams. The next community agreement that we're going to go over is oops and ouch. And this is along the same lines as honoring intent versus impact, but a verbal cue that you can use if you are not in alignment with what somebody else has said is ouch, ouch, that hurt me. And then the other person who said the thing that offended someone else would say, oops, and then that is a verbal cue to have a dialogue about it. And next, we're going to go transition to Mentimeter to talk about what else you would like to see from the session. So, okay, help me navigate there so that people can see what comes up.
I have, so I'm guessing I need to stop sharing. Well, not stop sharing.
Yeah, so quickly, we're going to navigate to the Menti so that we can see what community agreements you want to share. Let me just go to menti.com.
What is the first?
Do you remember the code?
No.
8550-4204. Is the Menti working okay for everyone? Yep. Okay.
So what do I do?
Oh, those. Okay, so I think there's actually a way that I need to sign in so that I can see the responses. So I'm going to do that really quickly. My apologies. We're actually going to stop screen sharing really quick and then go back to screen share.
Yeah, I know what you have. Has anybody submitted on the next yet? First question is, what are we looking to solve? I said I hearted it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So wait, I did it, but what community agreement would you like to implement? And then I clicked on open Q&A and then just submitted it there.
Okay.
Yeah, so try that.
Also, if it would be easier, we can just open up the floor to see if anybody has any community agreements that's coming up for them right now, and then we can pass around the microphone.
Just fun to try it.
Yeah.
Can you talk again about what is a community agreement?
Yeah. Do you want to navigate just back to the slide?
Yeah.
Hello, testing. Yeah. So a community agreement is basically, you can think of it kind of as a ground rule, but it's based in consent. So it's something that we all agree upon within this room, both in person and virtually, so that we can have a productive conversation that's both intentional and respectful. So a community agreement, like for instance, intent versus impact, is something that we all agree that we're going to keep with us throughout the session and hold at the center of when we're having dialogues together. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everybody.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, so a different way that we can navigate this is if anybody has any community agreements that they want to share, maybe we can pass around the mic or put them in the chat. And if not, we can just go ahead and move on.
Yeah.
Do you,
I don't need one. I think we should agree to not take anything personal, that this should be a safe space for us to ask questions, because there are no dumb questions. I remember when I first heard about climate adaptation, I swear I thought y'all were talking about for disabilities, right? And so just providing a safe space for us to really build capacity by being able to be transparent about our questions and how we feel. Because for some folks, it's a shame. They may not even believe in climate change or the work that we're doing, but they're here because they may have to be here for a reason, right? And that's okay too. Like, I think we should always seek to understand, and that we need to create a space where we're cultivating that kind of community. So that's my recommendation.
yeah, absolutely. So just to reiterate for the folks on Zoom, we're going to not take things personally as our community agreement. And with that, understand that people are coming into this this dialogue from different entry points in terms of knowledge and understanding. Okay, does anybody else have another community agreement, either virtually or in person? Is anybody seeing anything in the chat? I can't see that right now. So are we still screen sharing?
No.
Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any other community agreements in the chat. So what I'm going to do next is just ask you all to hold up a number from 1 to 5 on just like raise your hand or type it in the chat. And 1 or 0. So sorry. 1 is I don't agree with the community agreements. I want to revise them. And 5 is I agree and I'm fine to move forward. So we're going to do that right now. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, just to 5. Okay, perfect. It looks like we're all, and people in the chat are pretty fast. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the next part of our session, and this will be our first attempt at navigating Zoom in a new way, so that'll be super fun. But we'll be talking about team member roles and doing your initial project planning. Okay, so the objectives for this is to begin building your relationships amongst team members and figuring out who's in my team, who's going to be working on the same project as me. You're also going to be designating specific team members to take on specific roles, at least for today's kickoff, and then those roles can change after the kickoff event. And then you're also going to begin discussing and planning your community project, which is super exciting. That's why we're all here today. Okay, team formation.
And we're on page 6 in the handbook for folks who are following along in their handbook.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Okay, so now we're going to transition to an activity, super fun and exciting. This activity is going to include 3 major steps. Okay, we're all ready? The first thing that we're going to do, and we're going to ask you to stand up. So sorry, once again. But you're going to sit with your assigned group. And you all should, for those who are in person, your name tag should have a group member or a group number. And you'll see on the walls, we've indicated where team 1 should sit, team 2 should sit, and team 3 should sit. So let's go ahead and get up and try to do that now, and then I'll give you the next set of instructions. We'll go one at a time. Okay, while everyone is navigating there in person, I'm going to relay the 2 other instructions that are in this activity, and then Zoom folks are going to go into breakout rooms, okay? So while you're in your teams, which is what we're going to do next, you're going to introduce yourselves once again. Specifically, we want you to say your name. We're going to be saying names throughout the course of this event because I, for one, am bad at remembering names. So we're going to do that a few times. And then what role do you hope to play in your project, as well as what are your strengths and assets? So that's the second thing you're going to do. And then the third thing that you're going to do once you're all in your teams is assign each team member in your group a role. And in your workbook, you have a page that talks about what are those different roles, how those can show up in your team, but also feel free to be flexible with the roles that you want to assign folks and do what works best for you. That's what we want to keep at the core of this. So those roles include a facilitator, a Zoom liaison, a note taker / speaker, a timekeeper, and then someone to play an active voice role. And then once again, you can look at your role type sheet to see what those mean. In this, we really want to encourage community leaders to take more of a facilitating and envisioning role and kind of be at the helm of the project and the brainstorming around the project. And then adaptation practitioners, you're going to be more in a listening role and connecting the dots to what your community leaders are saying about their project. And so now that I've explained that, we're going to go into breakout rooms. And then folks who are in person, you're going to navigate to Zoom to be in the same breakout room that your folks online are in. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. So we are going to move into a section called Principles of Quality Climate Change Adaptation. And the purpose of this section is to really get as far as we can on setting a baseline understanding for everyone in the room, no matter what your background is, no matter where you're coming from, what is climate change adaptation, and how do we do it effectively and equitably. So all the information I'm going to share has been generated with, by, and for ASAP members. So a lot of folks in the virtual and physical room might identify that way, but other folks might not identify that way yet. And so definitely looking for you all to be contributing along the way. If there's anything you want to push back on that's different from your own experience, please feel free to share. If you're on Zoom, just raise your hand. And if you're in the room, raise your hand physically and we will get to your comment. All right. No, yes, okay, super. Okay, we are not using this agenda because we're a little far behind, but that's okay. We're gonna have a shortened presentation and then we're gonna share all the information that we don't get to today. We'll share with you either via email or we'll do another presentation down the road. But what we are gonna get to is a quick introduction to climate change adaptation and to ASAP's adaptation guidance resources. And then we are so lucky to have one of our adaptation practitioners today with us, Teal Harrison from Adaptation International, who's going to share a case study of how do we put these principles into practice. And then we are not going to do our break because that's what we just did, but we're going to go into a short small group activity, and then we are going to move into lunch. Any questions about the agenda that we're not really following? Okay, great. And hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be able to recognize principles for quality climate change adaptation in your work and the work that's taking place in your community. You'll have a chance to prioritize what principles are most important to you, but also hear from others about what principles are important to them, and consider where you have the power to make improvements in the work that you're doing and the work that's happening in your community, kind of regardless of where you sit and regardless of what resources may or may not be available. All right, so we are going to go into breakout rooms later on in this session, and we want to make sure that the groups are diverse across people who are more and less familiar with how climate change adaptation fits into your work. So if you're on Zoom, please change your Zoom name to reflect where you fall on this spectrum. So if you're a 1, that means you're like, what is climate change adaptation? And if you're a 5, you're like, I'm adapting to climate change. I am an adaptation practitioner. I'm like really solid in that. If you're in the room, we have on the wall a spectrum for this. So over towards this side, towards the team 1 side sign is what is climate adaptation. And over there towards the team 2 sign is I'm adapting to climate change. So please stand up, take your pen and your workbook with you. You won't need your computer unless you're using it for your own note taking. And put yourself somewhere on that spectrum. So first, to start us off, I want us to think about why we want to adapt to climate change. And to get us thinking about that, let me ask you, what do you love about your neighborhood? What makes your neighborhood special? And as we're thinking about that, we're going to be thinking about Ward 5 and Ward 3, which are the 2 neighborhoods in which our projects are taking place. We have 2 projects in Ward 3 and 1 project in Ward 5. I think I got that right. Okay, great. And so now that you're all settled and cozy at your tables, I'm going to make you stand up again. And right here on the front table, we've got some sticky notes and some markers. And over here, we've got Ward 3, and over here, we've got Ward 5. So what makes Ward 3 or Ward 5 special? What do you love about Ward 3 or Ward 5? If you don't know yet, because you're not a member of those communities, just observe and read what people put on the sticky notes. Of course, the Zoom version of this is the chat. So please do share in the chat. What do you love about Ward 3? What do you love about Ward 5? And we are going to translate those to sticky notes and share them with you all. For folks on Zoom, I'm just gonna, I am going to give you a tour of the sticky note wall, and we have put your sticky notes on the wall as well. What's that?
Third ward, we refer to it as third ward instead of Ward 3. Like the wards, it's ward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's
multiple community gardens.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go to.
All right. Can we get a volunteer to read out the sticky notes for Ward 3 for the folks who are on Zoom? Do you want to do it, Vanessa?
Volunteer.
Third Ward, sorry.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
No worries.
I'm learning.
Do you want me to come up here or what's best? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what people love about Third Ward, we talked about Emancipation Park and Project Row House. We talked about the culture and the rich history, the Columbia Tap Trail, which is a trail that connects multiple parts of the city, including downtown to the third ward. The institutions there, particularly the historically Black University, TSU, and there's also University of Houston and some of the medical center. And a cultural arts district, which is also next to the Project Row Houses again. Huey Homes, which I read today was one of the oldest public housing and largest in Houston. We've got like a confetti situation. And let's see, the people. And one more thing I just saw was the urban ecology. Apparently there's bald eagles.
Awesome, thanks, Vanessa. Okay, nothing is sticking today. If you're, just so you guys know, like also in the room, like our name tags are not sticking either. It's humidity, yeah. Okay, so for folks who, we're talking about the 5th ward, does someone want to come up and give us a little tour of the 5th ward wall and what you love about it?
All right, guys, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Okay, great. So we are working on getting the screen share back up and running. So sorry about this. But we are gonna just keep moving. All right. So at ASAP, when we are thinking about people adapting to climate change, the definition that we use is, and Sequoia showed this before, it's also in your glossary at the very back of your handbook, the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects in order to decrease harm or take advantage of opportunities. And we just talked about some of the things that we want to protect or decrease harm for. We talked about all the things that we love in the 5th ward and in the 3rd ward. And part of adaptation is taking advantage of opportunities, such as opportunities to increase the benefits that neighborhoods can get from existing assets in those neighborhoods. And another important concept is adaptive capacity. So this is the ability to adjust to a hazard, to take advantage of opportunities, or to cope with
change. So we just said that not all climate impacts are negative, but of course it's really important to address the negative ones too. So let's go over some key climate impacts in Houston. Extreme heat, flooding, sea level rise, drought, extreme events. And those impacts combine with other vulnerabilities to create issues like lack of green space, making extreme heat even worse, lack of reliability in the electric grid during extreme weather, leading to health emergencies, petroleum storage, leaking hazardous chemicals during floods. And before we stop talking about the negative impacts, I want to ask, what are some climate impacts that you're experiencing? And maybe you've already started to talk about this in your teams, but just to kind of bring it out in the open for other folks on other teams to hear as well. So let's start with someone who is living in the 3rd ward. Can you tell us about one climate impact that you're experiencing?
When there is extreme heat and like past few days, not everyone can turn their air conditioner on at the same time, especially in the home, because the grid that we're on, it will fail. So you'll see brownouts happen, or the lights will go out completely, and it takes anywhere from 6 to 10 hours to fix. So with all of the new concrete going in, and the way it's set up, 9 times out of 10 there's going to be more flooding. When Harvey hit, we didn't flood in the city home. That was one thing that was really good. But now it's changing. More precision, more houses being built so close together. There's a chance that there'll be more flooding.
Thanks for sharing, Dolores. Yeah, so first of all, can folks on Zoom hear, and were folks on Zoom able to hear Dolores describing the climate impacts?
It was a bit hard to hear her, but I think we caught most of it.
So yeah, just to summarize, Dolores was sharing about how during times of extreme heat, when people can't all turn their air conditioner on at the same time, because it could overload the grid, as well as new concrete coming in and making flooding worse.
Some of the things that she shared.
You see it? Yeah, copy.
But we have to.
And then when you go back to Gmail,
Okay.
To go.
If you just share your screen, it'll show up. on the-
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Okay, awesome. Oh, you're gonna do the slide advance? Yeah. Okay, next slide. All right, but of course, the good news is that you guys know, you already started talking about with your teams, there are a lot of great strategies and actions that we can take to address these climate impacts and to address the root cause of climate change, greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. And a lot of these strategies and actions are already showing up in some of your projects. So things like checking in on neighbors during extreme events, planting trees and adding green space, energy conservation, but also renewable energy and community-owned renewable energy. All right, next slide. And we're gonna skip down to the next slide. Yeah, okay. So, oh no.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm gonna sit here. Can you guys, is the audio on? Can someone just, where is the audio coming from? For Zoom?
We're getting it through your mic right now, Rachel.
Okay.
Here.
Okay, great.
I don't know if
Do you want me to turn this mic off?
No. All right. So as I mentioned before, ASAP has several resources to help support folks in making sure that as they're implementing strategies on the ground, that those strategies are going to lead to equitable and effective climate adaptation. So we have our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion statement, and that articulates ASAP's acknowledgement of historic injustices and our responsibility to correct them. We have our Code of Conduct and Professional Ethics. It describes the values, beliefs, and guidelines that ASAP expects climate adaptation practitioners will adhere to. What we're going to focus on today is our living guide to the principles of climate change adaptation. So this synthesizes both existing and aspirational principles of equitable and effective adaptation practice, as well as we have our glossary. And those two resources, again, are in the back of your handbook. We also have Spanish versions available of those resources. They're not the exact same as the ones that are in your handbook. But if you have any Spanish speakers on your team, or you yourself are a native Spanish speaker and you prefer to access those in Spanish, those are in your reminder email from this morning. All right. So we're going to dive in and really briefly just go over what is the content that is in the Living Guide to the Principles of Climate Change Adaptation. Again, so that we can kind of have a shared set of foundational knowledge and understanding as we go into working on projects together. So the Living Guide to the Principles of Climate Change Adaptation starts with desired outcomes. These are the why of climate adaptation. And the first why, like we talked about before, is to enhance adaptive capacity, which we can think about as making sure people have the tools they need to adapt to climate change. And some of those tools are things like knowledge, community connections, money, financial resources, as well as good governance. The other two whys are to reduce exposure and reduce sensitivity. So what are exposure and sensitivity? Exposure is how close you are to a climate hazard. So to reduce exposure, we want to move things out of harm's way. So for example, making sure that a new house isn't built in an area that is repeatedly flooding. Sensitivity. If you're affected by a climate hazard, how intense will that effect be? An example of reducing sensitivity is, let's say you lived in a wildfire-prone area, you could use fire-resistant materials when you build buildings in that area. And the next question is, for whom? First and foremost, we want to work to achieve these outcomes with and for folks who are highly exposed to climate risks because of where they live or work, and have less capacity to respond because of widespread discrimination. And so this includes Black people, Indigenous peoples, people of color, people with low wealth, immigrants and refugees, outdoor and migrant workers, and people with disabilities, LGBTQ+ people. And we have to incorporate these folks' lived experience into climate adaptation actions. So what do we need to do to adapt to climate change? Here are some basic categories of how the work gets done. Things like planning, communicating, and building. And in the case of LEAP projects, that might be building community gardens to increase food sovereignty, changing the way people travel to increase health and reduce heat island effects, and engaging neighbors during extreme events. And then the real meat of the Living Guide is this set of 15 principles, and these are going to be the focus for the rest of our session right now. These principles articulate how we should do adaptation work to ensure it is equitable and effective. And so I want to encourage you, as I'm moving through these, to flip to that appendix in your handbook, which I believe starts on page 30, and you can move along with them with me. So the first three principles we'll think about together are recognize context, think in systems, and address root causes of climate change, i.e. greenhouse gas emissions. So these principles are helping us see that both our challenges and our opportunities are all connected, and we need to think in an integrated and system-focused way as we take action on climate change. Another set of three principles we can think about together are safeguard people, safeguard nature, and avoid harm. And then another way that we talk about avoiding harm is avoiding maladaptation. And these three principles are all connected by an ethic of care and the need to be really intentional in our work and recognize potential negative consequences. These two principles use best available science and knowledge and use projections about future conditions, are about being intentional about what inputs you use in deciding how to take action to adapt to climate change. Science and knowledge for us includes Western science, lived experience, and traditional knowledges. And then another thing to note is that future conditions are really important to consider, and not just future climate conditions, but also future demographic conditions. What might the population look like in this community in the future? What might the ecology and the landscape look like? The next three principles, understand injustice and work towards justice, ensure fairness in decision-making, and ensure equitable distribution of costs and benefits. This helps us keep different aspects of justice and equity central to our climate adaptation work. And we're going to talk about that more in depth this afternoon after lunch. Next, we have network and learn together, collaborate, and use existing best practices. And this is all about being open to learning from and working with people across contexts and building on what's been established in other places, in other fields of practice, and in other industries. And then this final principle, take care, acknowledges that we need support to do the difficult work of adapting to climate change. And I want to take an extra moment here to offer a few ideas on how we can keep this in mind. So how can we take care? We can focus on assets, focus on the positive things that we have in our lives and our communities. We can focus on where we have the power to make change. We could take breaks for our bodies and our brains, and I promise we're going to be having a lunch break pretty soon. We can be in community and seek and give mutual support to one another. and seek joy, whether it's seeking joy in the work itself, in the world around us, in our hobbies, in our families, our loved ones. And so if everyone wants to just kind of pause for one moment here and share think about, how do you take care? How do you hold the work, care for yourself, and care for others? And is there one person on Zoom who wants to unmute and share how they take care?
Yeah, one thing I do to take care is be in community, and that involves getting my immediate community in climate adaptation, where I'm from, is the architectural community, and I'm part of an online national platform that's currently having a conversation. So that's how I'm currently in community.
Awesome. Thanks, Louie. Okay. This is good. You know what? We're going to be so good at this the next time we do it. All right. So lastly, you'll see in the living guide, you'll see a section on strategies and approaches. And these are strategies and approaches for gaining traction for adaptation action and really maximizing its effectiveness. And we're not going to focus strongly on these today, but I encourage you to take a look later and think about how you can use them in your work. Okay. Now, since there's more copies. Oh, thanks. We have a couple of other take care responses in the chat, taking short walks, and acknowledging that I don't take care of myself, like making it a priority is my first step to change. I can totally appreciate that, Daniela. All right. So that was a whirlwind tour of the Living Guide to the Principles of Climate Change Adaptation. Don't worry, you'll have more time to engage with this, both in your teams and individually. But, this was the theory. These were the words, and I am so, so excited and honored to introduce Teal Harrison from Adaptation International, who's going to show us how she, as an adaptation practitioner, puts these principles into practice. So Teal specializes in flood adaptation, community engagement, and coastal science. An advocate for equitable climate change adaptation, she currently works with municipalities and community members in the Gulf Coast to assess climate risk and proactively plan for future storms, floods, and coastal hazards. In past roles, Teal has worked in advocacy, outreach, and research capacities on regional flood planning, nature-based solutions to flooding, equitable disaster recovery, non-point source pollution, water quality, and food justice in the Gulf Coast and the Great Lakes. She's trained in social and natural sciences and holds a BA in behavioral biology from Johns Hopkins University and a master's of science in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Teal.
Oh, good. You have to mute.
Thanks so much, Rachel, Leap, ASAP, everyone, for that introduction. I wasn't expecting my life story to be out there, but are y'all gonna advance the slides for me? That's totally fine if you want to. But once again, my name is Teal Harrison, and thank you. I'm a climate resilience specialist with Adaptation International. And I've been with AI for about 3 years now, but if you go to the next slide, please, sorry. But AI has been around since 2010. And so Adaptation International supports communities, governments, and organizations in building climate resilience. And we do this in a variety of ways. And AI actually has been a longtime partner of ASAP, and that has included developing and supporting different regional climate engagements, creating the private sector private sector community of practice, and participating in different member-led groups. So that's another area that we've worked in. But if you go to the next slide. But what we do, in terms of Our partnership with communities, local governments, organizations, etc., falls under these 6 categories: climate adaptation and resilience planning, workshop design and implementation, outreach and engagement, mapping and geospatial analysis, vulnerability assessments, and communications and graphic design. So for my presentation today, I will be highlighting our work in workshop design and implementation, as well as outreach and engagement. And that's going to be specific to a project that's called the Equitable Resilience Builder Project by the EPA. Next slide, please. All right. So the Equitable Resilience Builder is an EPA pilot project, basically by their Office of Research Development, trying to figure out how they can support communities in being able to overcome any barriers or obstacles or otherwise build capacity to making plans or identifying actions, etc., that are going to yield equitable results in their community, right? So if it's not resilience, if we don't have equity, if we're not addressing root causes, etc. So essentially, what this is a toolkit of resources as well as a training process. And as climate adaptation and resilience consultants, our role in this project was to work across different EPA regions. I don't know how many regions they have, but I want to say it's like at least 7, to essentially implement this toolkit and this process with those regions' community partners. Next slide. So Adaptation International, along with Climate Resilience Consulting, which some folks may or may not be familiar with, had the pleasure of working in EPA Region 4. That's essentially the Southeast. And they're partners in 2 communities, Barnwell County, South Carolina, and Burke County, Georgia. And, I think one thing to note is that the community partners and communities that we worked with, they already had longstanding relationships. So the Amani group essentially was I'm trying to think about the word, the foundation of all of the wonderful work that was happening in that area, led by Reverend Brindlin Jenkins Bozeman. And then, EPA Region 4, their specialist, Dr. J. Kyle Bryant, also has personally been working as an environmental justice advocate in the region, for his whole life. Next slide. All right. So like I said, we were assigned to work in Burke County, Georgia, and Barnwell County, South Carolina. But really what we were doing is piloting this project, this Equitable Resilience Builder tool in a larger region called the Central Savannah River area. And so essentially, this is, I feel like, a classic environmental justice or injustice story. It's this region between South Carolina and Georgia, broken up by the Savannah River and surrounded by Superfund sites, industrial corridors, and exposed to a variety of extreme weather and climate events. I guess most notorious of these is the Savannah River site. And so in that top right corner, you can see a nuclear reactor. This is a huge nuclear site, and also one of the only ones that's continuing to add nuclear facilities in the country, that has had spills and accidents since its creation, I think in the early World War I, World War II era. There's also been other critical incidents like train derailments, a recent tornado that was in January, ice storms, hurricanes, you name it. On top of that, the CSRA is basically a cluster of historically underserved communities as well. And we actually had the opportunity to work with 7 folks from 7 of those counties because it's a rural community also. So next slide. Okay, so like I said, this might sound nebulous so far. We have this toolkit that EPA, a federal agency, wants to more or less trial at the community level to see how it can help them achieve their equity and resilience goals. So our project partners, Reverend Jenkins Bozeman and Kyle J. Bryant, their goals were basically to pilot the ERB as a prototype for building a faith-based coalition to address emergency preparedness, environmental injustice, social disparity, and climate resilience. And so in order to do that work, I want to highlight, 3 principles that we implemented, and I think were the most important to the project success. And these are recognizing context and thinking in systems, understanding injustice and working towards justice, and networking and learning together. All right. So the project took place in the form of workshop trainings with local residents. We did, 2 trainings in each community, focused on hazards and social vulnerability, basically mapping hazards and vulnerable folks in the community. I'm happy to talk more in detail about the various activities therein if you're interested. And our second workshop, next slide, please, is focused on identifying equitable resilience actions based on community identified concerns. All right. Next slide. Okay. So, I think the first principle that I want to highlight is going to be recognize context and think in systems. I left out, you may notice, address root causes, because for reasons that are hopefully obvious by the end of this presentation, greenhouse gases isn't the root cause of what's going on in these communities, right? In terms of climate, resilience, et cetera. All right, so recognize context. I've talked a little bit about the CSRA already, but what is important to note, what was important for us to know as consultants coming into this was that we're working with Black communities, rural communities, low income, and church-going folks, or faith-based communities, I think is probably a more general term. We're walking into a geography and culture that we might not have experience with, as well as an area that's plagued with multiple Superfund sites and climate exposure, and also walking into a team that has private sector adaptation consultants, federal agencies, and grassroots advocates. All right, next slide. So what did we do with that, right? Recognition, for us, eventually kind of transferred to building cultural competency or leveraging the cultural competencies that we already had as a team. And, context basically touched every aspect of our project, from beginning to end, from our very first meeting as a team, my facilitating this project, kind of bringing those different folks together, understanding context plays into that, to how we reached out to folks, to how we designed the workshop and planned it. So, just as an example, for scheduling, I kind of feel like this is funny, but me and Reverend Jenkins Bozeman, we were trying to, figure out, we didn't want to hold people for 8 hours. And we wanted to do it at a time that, folks could come and they weren't working. But we also knew that, these were church folks and Black folks, and we're probably not going to give up 2 Saturdays in a row for a workshop. So we decided to do our workshop every other Saturday, so we can get folks in the room. And on a more serious note, we also understood the context of the environmental justice movement, things that are happening in the area, and scheduled those workshops a little bit ahead of schedule compared to the rest of the project, so we can have this introduction and ideally funnel folks into upcoming capacity building and training exercises that our community partners were leading. All right, as far as outreach, you can leave it on that slide. Thank you. As far as outreach, you can see our flyer here. We kind of did what more or less could be considered a old school approach. We didn't have Eventbrites. We had print flyers. We were going to church events, community festivals. We had radio advertisements and direct outreach to folks and word of mouth. And that is by nature of some of just the age of the communities, the tech capacity of the communities, and just otherwise how folks are getting to know what's going on, what's happening. And of course, hearing it from trusted folks is better than just getting a link and a email invitation to something. Similarly, our context played into our facilitation. I think the biggest example of this, we had 4 hours, a tight timeline, and introductions might have been like 15 or 20 minutes, but they took an hour. And the reason for that is because people were not just introducing themselves, they were sharing their testimony. And that is something that I feel like some folks that were with me on my consultant team, they were like anxious and itching, like, should we cut these off? And I was like, absolutely not, because that would have been something that would have been disrespectful to our participants, but also a disservice to us in terms of understanding and trying to learn their lived experiences, gather their local knowledge, et cetera, because those stories held so much and made our activities that we had to make some adjustments to timing and how we did things even more rich going forward. And the last thing I'll comment on context is, it was also important for us to embrace resilience on their terms, in their terms, right? So EPA comes in with this tool. It can be, they tried their best not to make it academic. It still is, it's a little bit rigid in terms of what we're looking at. But, understanding the context of the communities, their issues, we weren't surprised that the most urgent issues are going to be homelessness, cybersecurity threats, gun violence and mental health, and pollution. Or I guess maybe I'll say I wasn't surprised, but it was important as a facilitator for me to anticipate that, and then also support that in the workshop and communicate its validity and relevance, up to these federal partners that aren't maybe on the ground and understanding so much. So, all right, next slide. Thank you. I feel like this kind of goes hands in hand, but this project was very much rooted on understanding injustices and working towards justice. Reverend Jenkins Bozeman, is I think she's just amazing and has been fighting for environmental justice in her communities, social justice in communities, pretty much her entire life. Is known all throughout the CSRA for doing that work. And so it was really important, to not only try to recognize what the community has been through, but also try to center this on empowerment, in the community. And like I said, building that network, a coalition of folks that can continue to move that work. So we've kind of talked about some of these structural injustices. And so I won't go through those. Next slide. All right. So, no 2 workshops can't, address failed infrastructure right away. No, we're not going to solve structural and racism, institutional racism right away. But like I said, the idea of this, in terms of working towards justice, was essentially addressing what we can in this moment and also planning ahead for the future. So the project originally was supposed to be centered on resilience and climate resilience at that, not just community resilience, but there is a clear disparity in emergency preparedness, response in CSRA communities. And so our community partners really pushed to incorporate emergency preparedness training into this workshop, right? So folks who have literally just been through tornadoes or a major ice storm that had happened, I think maybe 2 or 3 years before, actually know how to advocate and leave, knowing how to advocate for what they need in a disaster situation and prepare. And so we did this through, I want to call it a role-playing exercise. I feel like that doesn't describe it. It's actually a really great exercise called Survival that is looking at group power dynamics in emergency response, but in a way that's a little bit detached, right? It's almost a trauma-informed way of going about this because it's not rooted in what they've experienced before. But basically this highlights what folks might expect from folks who are like parachuting into their community, right? So we're understanding how they're thinking, we're understanding how also interpersonally on the ground, what stress people are feeling. Okay, how can we take that and flip it and help each other, you know, before and during, after, you know, a disaster. So that was very important. And you can see on the bottom right, folks taking some of the print resources that were provided as well. One thing I didn't neglect to mention about context is, you know, we had primarily older folks in the room. We had some tech limitations. We had adult literacy limitations. So the way that we facilitated our work was multimodal. We had initial pushback about having so many print materials, but it was necessary, you know, and similarly, we did pre-post surveys and we had folks available to do it orally versus written, et cetera. I think the biggest way that we tried to, or we at least embody this principle of working towards justice was basically pushing, I think, what the action context is, or the scope of action that you kind of typically see in these kind of workshop trainings. In my, I guess, limited experience, you know, in adaptation work, we see things go all the way up, if we're lucky, to the point of identifying some strategies that might work to address an issue. And so, you know, my goal was basically to more or less massage this tool and add on things that, you know, not only identifies issues, not only maybe identifies some strategies, but also gets to the point of at least outlining a specific action plan that folks can take home and start on the next day. So I have an example of one here for water quality, but there were a variety of plans that folks worked together during the workshop to create. And lastly, working towards justice, we did our best to increase, we did our best to increase access to resources, but also recognition, right? Paying folks for their time and their expertise. From the very beginning, it was established that they are the local experts, that their knowledge and information, that's the data that we need to build resilience and be successful in that. And so that was really critical, and everyone got an award, like I said, and a stipend at the end. Next slide.
And Teal, we have about 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm doing my best. I have ADHD, I'm neurodivergent, and my perception of time culturally is a lot different, but I promise I'm almost done. All right, so the third principle that I think, you know, came about in this project, I don't think it was necessarily like top of mind for me, but at the end, it was evident, was networking and learning together, right? So the ERB tool, I've been talking about Region 4, but it was actually a process and a tool that was piloted across multiple regions and communities. So in addition to Barnwell and Burke counties, they were adaptation professionals that did similar engagements in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Buffalo, New York, and, you know, how to navigate essentially different climate challenges, social issues in those cities. So together, we were able to kind of put that together to improve the tool. And then similarly, our region was essentially hinged on creating a network as well. So we got to see kind of the, I guess, aftermath of our project and the networking that was created, especially in that last workshop, just by the way that it was structured. Next slide. And so just to give you all an example of this, within our workshop setting, we made sure everyone had everyone's contact information, and we made commitments to one another and our community. And this is something that we shared back. We kind of did it with like a quilt with different cards at the workshop. But this is what we shared back. And you can see, just reading some of these, how networking and learning together is already embodied in some of these next steps that community members have committed to take. And then on the, I guess, internal project side, you can see that we have this EPA ERB readiness flowchart, and that's something essentially based on all of our collective experiences trying to pilot this tool, our partners' experiences working with us, you know, an additional guidance document that the EPA can use to not only improve their tool, but also support those who are going to ultimately use it in different contexts. So that is that. I'm gonna go over our project outcomes. Next slide. Thanks, Daniela. I appreciate it. I see the fire emoji. So our project outcomes, I'm super proud of this project. I mean, and a lot of that really is because of our local partners. But, you know, together in these 2 workshops, 60 folks who may or may not have known each other before came up with over 30 community identified issues of concern, and over 40 resilient strategies to address them. And then taking that, worked collectively to identify the top 8 for their community. So it was 4 in Barnwell and 4 in Burke County, and worked together to outline action plans for one strategy, you know, going forward. So I think that was really great. And, you know, last but not least, next slide. We successfully created a new network of over 60 faith and community leaders that were trained in methods to build equitable resilience in their congregations and community, as well as emergency preparedness, and left with that day resources to begin doing so. And one of my favorite outcomes of this is actually, I think it was within a couple of weeks, there was a new partnership between a sheriff that attended. A lot of folks wore multiple hats, so he was a sheriff and community member, and some pastors that attended, right, to try to address youth gang violence, mental health, et cetera, in a holistic way. So, you know, not only did we have this network, but we already have different initiatives kind of coming out of that. All right, and with that, I am done. I'm really happy to share this project with you. It was really great, and I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have over chat or email or what have you.
I'm gonna Teal, thank you so much. That was, is this working? Can folks on Zoom hear me?
We can hear you.
Teal, thank you so much. That was really just an incredible illustration of the principles in the Living Guide. So wonderful to hear about your work. And I think so many parallels to what a lot of the community teams are going to be working on. And so we can learn so much from you, and we're so glad to have you as part of the project. We can take a couple of questions for Teal before we move on. Are there any questions in the room for Teal?
And if you could just ask folks on Zoom to raise their hand.
Any questions for Teal in the room? Yeah, here, come up.
I just wondered if she'll share her slides.
Oh, yep, you're gonna get all the slides at the end. Yep. Okay, any questions on Zoom?
Let's see, can I remove your spotlight?
Yeah.
Hey, Daniela.
Daniela, did you, yeah, go ahead, Daniela. One second,
Yeah.
we're gonna turn on the audio.
Okay, you're on, turn yours off.
Good to go? Testing.
You're good.
Awesome. Yes, first of all, that was amazing. We just spent an hour over at United Way and put this to the universe literally in 1 hour, asking for this entire project. And within 24 hours, it manifested itself in front of us. Janari and I are sitting here just in complete shock, as that's every element of what we were hoping for Fifth Ward. So kudos to Teal and the team over there for all this work. And we're just excited to be able to see this. One of the questions I had, or the only question I had, was there a solar component? Because we were going through the slides and I missed if there was any like solar components to the work.
Yeah, that's a great question. So solar wasn't necessarily a component that came up. Their electrical grid is very much, it's underfunded. There's clear disparity across county lines, but folks were actually really primarily worried about their water quality. So that didn't necessarily rise to the top as an issue of concern. So we didn't necessarily get to solar as a strategy there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, because we're in Fifth Ward and we kind of have the same issues. The grid, obviously, we're a state of Texas. So that never got fixed. And then we do have water quality issues because we do have lead throughout the community and in elementary, middle schools and high schools as well as lead paint on the homes. So thank you for sharing this. It was just such a powerful moment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Go ahead and do the test.
Teal, can you hear me?
Y'all can hear? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so you mentioned some of the root causes. And so when we're engaging the community, how do we balance what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to climate resiliency with the much grander needs of the community when it comes to building opportunities, educational opportunities, access to healthcare? Do you have any guidance for us as we are developing our community engagement strategies on how to be attentive to those very important needs, but also focus on what we can accomplish as part of these projects?
I think I heard most of that. There was like some background noise. But as far as, I guess, balancing climate resilience, and please correct me if I have misunderstood, but climate resilience and some of the root causes and, ongoing issues in communities, when I said resilience on their terms, like, I think one part of that is really, I find in the adaptation community, folks kind of get stuck on framing or terminology, et cetera. So I think really being willing to, I guess, let go of that, right? And think in systems, which is one of the principles for adaptation, climate change adaptation is really what's going to help you be able to see those connections between the resilience outcomes you're coming in with and, the outcomes that communities are coming with and how they basically merge, right? And so I do think that it probably takes some practice to think that way, perhaps. But, I think framing is always the first place where I kind of start an engagement, and I think that goes right back to the context piece as well. But you have to get kind of, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm rambling at this point. But yeah, I think people really have to kind of just like let go and lean in to what folks are talking about. Especially if you are, supposedly the like adaptation resilience expert in the room, lean into that, step back from it, put it on your whiteboard, make those connections, and work together to create those actions, right? Like co-benefits is a huge aspect of what we do. And so, I think that's also a natural kind of area to kind of couch maybe some of these, I'm not going to call them competing aspects, but these like, these aspects in the same, I guess, place. Sorry. I hope that answers your question. If not, just send me a message or I guess you can't send me a message in the chat, but I'll send my email in the chat.
Okay. Thank you so much, Teal. I think that was a really wonderful answer. Actually, so yeah, no sorries needed. Okay. We're back. We're back in our old setup. This was such a great setup. All right, so what were you gonna do next? We have about 5 minutes before lunch. Can you advance to the next slide? All right, and one more. Okay, super. So there's so much here. There's so much to process. There's so much that Teal shared with us about not just community engagement, but a whole host of other strategies and processes that we can use as we're implementing our projects. Luckily, we have a whole session in this afternoon devoted to community engagement, so we'll be able to go back there. But what I want folks to do now is take some time individually to sit with the principles that you're just exposed to. So flip to that section of your handbook, scroll to it if you're using a PDF. And jump to page, what page are we on? I'll tell you in 1 second. Jump to page 14 of your handbook. So keep a finger in page 30 on the living guide, and then also jump to page 14, and you'll see that you have an opportunity to think about what are 5 principles that you just learned about. Just focus on 5, maybe even just focus on 3 that really resonate with you, that you want to bring into your work. And maybe they resonate with you because you're already doing them, because they are already super important to you. And so if that's the case, that's great. Or maybe they resonate with you because you're like, this is new to me. I haven't been thinking about this, and I really want to create an opportunity for myself to think about that more deeply. So choose 5 and flip to that worksheet in your handbook where you'll have the opportunity to write down the name of the principal and then turn it into a question. What's a question that you can ask yourself to keep that principle front of mind as you're moving forward with your community adaptation project? So we're going to take 5 minutes on this, 3 minutes on this, and that's going to lead us into our lunch break. Okay, for anyone who on Zoom who might be a little bit lost, the actual worksheet where you're going to write down the principle and turn them into a question, I believe is on page 14. And then in the appendix where you have the printout of the living guide, you're going to flip a couple of pages and look for section 3. It's titled section 3 principles. So if you haven't found that yet, you can scroll or flip to section 3 principles. And that's where you get to see the principal names and descriptions. All right, so feel free to keep thinking and keep writing if you'd like. We are going to take one reflection from in the room and one reflection from on Zoom. So, and then before we leave this section, I just want folks to know everything that we're dabbling in today, meeting each other, our project plans, principles of adaptation, community engagement. We're going to return to each of those things at different points throughout the program. So if you feel like you didn't get enough of something, don't worry, you'll get more. All right. Is there anyone from the room that wants to come up to the mic and just share one question that they've developed for themselves? Let us know what principle you're thinking about and what question you're going to be asking yourself to keep that principle top of mind. Yeah. So, yeah. So the folks on Zoom can hear you.
Hi. One topic I've been interested in for maybe the past few years or maybe longer is data literacy and how in my work, in my projects, especially when I have like limited time, how can I really help build the ability of community members and partners to use data, understand data, rather than just deliver a graphic or a map, but truly help build that in a long-term sustainable way. So there's my topic.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Melissa. All right. And how about on Zoom? All right. So this is from Carolyn. Oh, this is the question. Okay, let's get to Carolyn. Oh yeah, okay, perfect. So since people tend not to think in terms of systems, what are strategies and methods for communicating systems to stakeholders in a planning process? And Carolyn, I think that's maybe a question for us to dive into, in addition to a question for us to keep this principle at the top of our minds. So let's keep that and get into it. We also have some responses from Vidya. How does my work address root causes of climate injustices, colonization, racialized capitalism? Where do I hold power and how can I share it? How can I find allies to help me gain access to the power that I don't have? How can I collaborate in more inclusive ways? And what are the gaps in my knowledge, especially regarding Indigenous ways of knowing and thinking? And from Bala, when I look at a planning context, what systems do I not look at? What are my systemic blind spots? All right. So I want to invite everyone to stand up. Take a deep breath in and out, and do a little stretch. All right. Wow. Okay. We've gone through a lot so far today. First of all, we've all learned how to run a hybrid meeting in room G of United Way. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. You started to connect with your team. You've started to introduce yourselves to your team members, the people that you're going to be working with over the next 15 months. We started to learn about principles for equitable and effective climate adaptation, and we heard an amazing case study from Teal about the work that she did in Georgia and South Carolina, and got some really awesome inspiration for work that we might take into our projects. There's so much more to come. I want to invite everyone to take this lunchtime. We have 30 minutes for lunch, so it's 20 after, and we'll go till 10 till. Take this lunchtime however you need to take it. If you need some time alone and you want to take your lunch in the hall, if you want to stay on Zoom and chat with your Zoom mates, if you want to chat with people in the room, if you want to keep reading the Living Guide, whatever works for you works for us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Erin for the lunch logistics, and we are going to let folks on Zoom know some logistics for them as well.